saying, you know, yes, recording in progress. And this is a very interesting response considering it was only as recently as like 2020 through 2023 that we saw such a huge movement in the opposite direction. So, but as before, there is a lot of different factors that are compounding on this. There was a large portion of this is the pandemic and the social health and the that was concerns that were raised by having testing centers. And at this point now, a lot of tests have gone largely digital, and also there is obviously a change in how we are handling COVID-19. It's no longer such a threat that people are no longer going out into public or meeting in groups and those sorts of things. But there's also been a lot of analysis that schools have done after getting to see what a test optional landscape looks like for that particular school between the times of like 2019 to 2023. So, big reason why we're seeing this reversion is because high schools vary significantly in their grading systems, their coursework, or extracurricular opportunities, as it says here on the screen. So, put differently, grade inflation is actually a huge issue, especially when we're dealing with wealthy communities, where there are wealthy communities that can afford AP classes and all the students can do well in the AP class. And so you get a lot of, 4.0, 5.0 GPA students who are applying. And that GPA system has no need to be equivalent to any other GPA system that you're seeing at any other school, but every student from every school system is measured on that same GPA scale, right? So there can be students who are applying from schools where they have no AP classes whatsoever for the same spots at the same universities as students who are in very AP heavy school systems. So we get a lot of grade inflation that skews the data significantly if you're looking at GPA only. Similarly, extracurricular opportunities, same thing. A lot of different schools vary very, very widely on what opportunities there are for a student to flesh out their application. Because the mantra of these higher education systems when they originally made this transition was we want to look at the holistic applicant, we want to disregard this test measurement data, we're wondering whether or not this test measurement data is an accurate reflection of a student's success for candidacy at our school. But then again, the holistic application, just like with what school, with what courses are available, what GPA grading looks like, what extracurricular opportunities look like, that all varies very widely from school to school. So we are not necessarily equalizing what applications look like when we remove the ACT and SAT from the application package. Here, the ACT and SAT scores provide a common metric to compare students from different schools and regions objectively. This is an interesting point that a lot of schools have been drawn to because this is, unlike grades and extracurricular opportunities that do differ, this is the same test that's being put in front of every student. This is a little at odds with some of the social motivations that went behind the original decisions to turn away from ACT and SAT that we saw back in 2020. But at the same time, we've seen that just removing them without any further action hasn't given any big difference in the outcomes of admissions that they wanted to see when they did remove that policy for the more socially conscious reasons that are underscoring it, right? Because there was a large amount of rhetoric surrounding how fair it is to have an ACT and SAT barrier into higher education when you see some very interesting disparities along things like wealth and household income lines. However, just removing it was not the actual remedy that schools were necessarily looking for. So what a lot of schools have come to the conclusion here is that combining standardized test scores with GPA is the better predictor for college student success in their classroom and in their curriculum than looking at that student's GPA alone. And you can put this into practice. You've probably sat down with many students who have very high GPAs and they come in and they're scoring average or well below average on one of these standardized tests on their intake exams. And the common mantra that I used to say when I was making these sales pitches and everything is, I mean, all these tests do is test how well you take this particular test, right? This test is not necessarily geared towards testing exactly what is appearing in your classrooms, because different teachers have different curricula that they are putting in place for different reasons. But here, the SAT is about the SAT, right? How well do you take the SAT? So that's why we're in such a good position to teach about the SAT. So we do see those anomalies, right? Very low students with very low GPA students with high test scores, high GPA students with low test scores. And so this pairing those two data points together has been more beneficial for colleges when they're trying to develop their student body that they want to admit in the incoming test periods. Tests help colleges identify high potential students whose GPA may not fully reflect their abilities. This is where the sliding scale comes in, because when they actually did remove the SAT and ACT requirement, then the second data point was removed, right? We were evaluating them on one of those data points alone, which was their GPA, which, as we've already discussed at length, is not necessarily a very objective or fair or equitable measurement mark. Not to say that the SAT or ACT doesn't have its failings on those same measurement tools, but it certainly does have some more equitable nature to it because it is the same test form and from the same students. So schools have decided that they do value having that second data point to go back to the sliding scale, right? Which is the format where a student with a high GPA can offset a low score, or a student with a high score can offset a low GPA, or students with average and average are arguably, average, or the students with high on both ends are arguably very competitive applicants. And that sort of model that we've seen well before for many years before 2020. So colleges use ACT and ACT scores for national rankings and institutional reporting. And so this one is a little bit more of the competitive nature of colleges who want to develop themselves and market themselves as competitive or high-end or very selective schools. So having objective measurements that they can use to argue about their rankings, because there are many institutions that do very much value what their exact ranking is compared to their nearby competitors. We see this with a lot of the, well, I mean, obviously with the Ivy Leagues, but also a lot of the very prestigious, highly competitive schools. I mean, we're based here in Michigan, so University of Michigan is our local school that has a lot of concern for its ranking on the national stage. And I believe a lot of the participants here are from different states as well. So you probably have a lot of those schools that are much more selective, much more competitive. They have a bigger place on the national stage as opposed to some of your more regional schools. And so to compete nationally, these are the best benchmarks that they have to argue for fair measurement, not of the applicants, but of the school compared to other schools. And of course, schools very much value looking like they are the most competitive and attractive school. Now, streamlining the admissions decisions. This one is a particularly interesting point because when I was doing a lot of my research for the disparate outcomes that we see in SAT and ACT, a lot of the research and the literature on this matter talks about the fact that there is actually not a wide variety at the Ivy League schools in the SAT and ACT scores. That is to say, you can have any number of students who score 36 on the ACT. A large majority of the applicants at Ivy League probably do have that 35 or that 36. So at that point, that score is not actually making a huge determining factor in whether or not you're admitted. But what that score does do for that high-end school that has tens of thousands of people who have scored in the 99th and the 98th percentile on these exams is it gives them a clean cutoff mark that they can defend as objective and not based on any kind of alternate animus or goal in developing their student body. It is a tool for them to effectively and efficiently eliminate a large portion of their applications. And then the holistic analysis comes in after that hard line GPA, not GPA, SAT grade entry line comes in. So that was the thing that struck me most interestingly when I was doing this research was that if you do not have those high scores, you're probably not even being considered, right? We do see this look a little differently when we're getting more into the regional schools or schools that have less of that same issue where they're being crushed by tens of thousands of applicants who all have very competitive GPAs and very competitive SAT scores. But so when you get more to those regional schools and you're using this as your data point, it is also effective at the regional school who may not need it to cut out, half of their applications or three-fourths of their applications, but it is a way for them to look to candidates with lower GPAs and justify admission if they have a high score, or use it to better assess a student's GPA if they have like the high score and the low GPA. So um, regional schools are often in a better position to do the holistic review without having to have that hard line cut off the way that we see for most application entries at some of the higher end schools. But either way, regardless of which system and kind of which landscape is applying here for your students who want to go to those higher end Ivy League schools or the nationally competitive schools or the ones who want to get into the regional schools, either way, it is a material factor to their admission. Now that we are returning to using the ACT and the SAT as a measurement here. Scholarship and merit aid alignment. So this one is pretty standard from what we were dealing with in the pre-2020 era. A lot of financial aid is contingent not only on your family's need, but also on your score. I believe we have a regional school here in Michigan when I was helping a student who was being admitted, where not only was one factor they needed for certain scholarship packages their family need, it was also a qualifying ACT score. Which is to say that you can have different packages, and some of those packages will have higher value the higher your score is. So schools like that regional school, Central Michigan University here, are very explicit with it, and others it's a lot more implicit and not spoken, but it is absolutely the calculation they're performing in their admissions offices. So we definitely want to make sure that students are well aware that regardless of how publicly it is published on that school's website, this is also one way for them to get more aid regardless of their family's need status, right? The rationale for a school doing this, basing the aid off of the score, is obviously the school is just trying to make themselves more marketable to students that they believe are going to be more competitive applicants and better performing students. So this is largely an unchanged principle from pre-2020, but we are seeing it kind of come back to the forefront now that we're in the middle of kind of walking back our abandonment of the ACT and the SAT. Again, public health, COVID-19, we have largely adapted, and there's many different public health things in place for this. So we're no longer remote from schools. People go to schools, people go to work, people go to offices, right? So test centers are now back to full operation. People are going to high school every day. So the reason for you to not have access to the free SAT test that is offered by a public high school every year on the SAT test day in SAT states or ACT and ACT states is no more. And so we don't have that public health safety concern any longer that kind of also bolstered this walking back of the ACT and SAT requirement. And this gets back, I think this I touched a little in depth on this in my opening slide, so I might be repeating myself here, but colleges finding that test optional policies ultimately benefited their wealthier students, because those students not only have the access to a well-funded school district who has the opportunities, who has the teachers, the coaches, extracurricular opportunities, and the AP class curriculums, that the other students don't. But on top of that, those students likely also have access either to really well-trained and enthusiastic staff at their school. We have a very affluential school district here near us here in Michigan, where they have a very complex and dedicated college admissions department there. They have lots of essay work. They have lots of SAT prep from the inside of that school. A lot of these things that they're getting for free is just part of their public school system because they come from an affluential and well-funded district here. So we do see that ultimately having that and not having the more objective measurement of the ACT and the SAT to differentiate with that 2 data point model we talked about earlier has ultimately not resulted in what schools wanted, which when they did leave it, they wanted a more equitable access to the higher education. Because obviously in 2020, there's a large rhetoric surrounding how access to higher education has been impacted along racial and wealth income lines. And also we see that, so those same lines being reflected in a lot of the patterns in SAT and ACT scores. So the gut instinct for a lot of schools was to get rid of those scores. Ultimately, that did not give them the result they wanted, so they are bringing it back, and I'm sure schools will still be looking for other ways to try to accommodate those issues because that is still a pressing issue in a lot of circles and a lot of rhetoric. But ultimately, this did not accomplish what they were looking for at all. So for students applying to competitive programs, they will need those scores. So some institutions will have, you are admitted to the institution as a whole, but ultimately in your first year, second year, you have to prove not only that you can get the requisite GPA at the school, but also that you had the requisite ACT or SAT score to be admitted to a specific program at that school. So like a business college or an engineering college that you're admitted to your second year during your bachelor's degree is a very common measurement, because they want not only to see students who were successful at the school itself, but also students who had the drive beforehand. So this is a school's way of also helping themselves limit the applications that might come internally from their student body. Standardized tests are particularly useful for assessing international students' academic preparation, especially when their high school curriculum may not align with U.S. standards. In addition to a lot of the changes that we've seen in the test-taking landscape and the college admission landscape in 2020, we've seen a large amount of shift towards homeschooling or a large amount of shift of non-traditional school formats. In general, we see a lot of people who are drawn to more homeschool to magnet schools. We see people who are going to who leave the U.S. but ultimately want to come back for college. So we definitely schools are of the belief that this also provides objective measurement, that if you can compete along these objective data points of the SAT and the ACT with the US students, then there is less of an issue and they have to have less requirements, barring how a homeschool student might have to prove their credentials and the quality of their homeschool education if they have the qualifying scores on the SAT and the ACT. So test optional schools obviously have not completely gotten behind. Many schools are reinstating the test requirements. There are still some that are remaining test optional or test blind. Knowing every particular institution that a student is interested in is going to be super important in this landscape, because each school kind of is now at the point where they are tailoring their own individual approach. Because in addition to there being a lot of the different public patterns and public trends and public opinions that are underlying a lot of these movements that we've seen over the past 5 years, there is a lot of internal analysis that's happening from each college, and each college can be coming to and is coming to its own conclusions on how to evaluate and how to weigh the ACT and the SAT as they move forward. So being aware, especially of the common schools that your students in your client population are looking at mostly, knowing what each of those institutions' different philosophies are is going to be super informative and add value to any marketing that we're doing to a student who is looking for the tutoring with us. So as I said before, we are seeing a large return to requiring tests from a lot of the higher up universities, a lot of these more competitive universities on the national stage, because that SAT and that ACT provides a very effective objective cutoff line. It gives them more effective management of their student application process. It gives them more effective management of trying to maintain a more diverse or holistic approach to their application system. So you'll see a lot of the return, especially at these Ivy League levels. So like Brown, Harvard, Yale. Here are some of the big names, at least here. A lot of these are Midwestern names, but we have some national schools here as well, where we see that they are publishing typical SAT trends and average GPA trends. I do believe when I was looking at the slides here, and Sharon can correct me if I'm wrong, this gets more into some of what we would, the advice that we give to our students when we are in the marketing portion of this, when we're talking to a parent and to a student about what it means to be studying for the SAT and the ACT in the current landscape. So this is more so a value add to show that we are well versed on what this college application landscape looks like. Yes, I see Sharon telling me yes. So going through and highlighting that these are documented data statistics, so there are objective measurements that they can aim for to at least guarantee themselves the option to the holistic analysis. Going and then of course prepping for the actual SAT, things we are very much experts in at that point. What a good college planning plan looks like in the current landscape. It's honestly not very different from what we've seen before, right? This is actually more so an issue of you're going to have parents who are coming in and they're going to be deeply concerned because they've heard all of this or they see the headlines of we've left behind testing because it's dangerous, left behind testing because it didn't prove students' candidacy or success, or wasn't a good indicator, wasn't objective, it's a biased test, all those things. Oh, but now they've gone back to it. Oh, it's test optional, but test optional has some prejudice to it. So bearing in mind all the different questions and keeping track of the common questions that you're receiving at these intake sessions or and during any kind of marketing events that you're doing, and being prepared to answer them with a lot of this information that's discussed here is going to alleviate a lot of the concerns of parents and future clients who ultimately are not going to necessarily understand that largely a lot of what applying to college looked like in the past is a lot of what it looks like now today. And by in the past, I mean like as recently as 2018, not necessarily when parents were applying for college, right? Because that landscape has changed quite a bit. So again, here's more of our value add. So I believe that is all I had. Any questions, thoughts, concerns?
So, Hannah, I have a question for you
Yes.
while we potentially get questions from our attendees.
Mhm.
What what do you suggest for a student who might be considering multiple schools? They want the Ivy League, they're looking at top state schools as well, but they truly want that Ivy League.
Yes. All right, so yes, you will often get students who very much want to aim for the stars, and for some, you might look at their incoming paperwork and their scores and say, yes, I can see that for you, or it might seem more like a stretch. Obviously, you don't share with the student necessarily think it's more of a stretch for them, but every student, regardless of what their goals are, should have basically three categories of college application in mind. They should have their, aim for this, aim for the moon, my dream school list, short list. They should have the things they're happy with, like if you aim for the moon but you land among the stars schools that they're applying to as well. And then also, of course, we're well familiar with the concept of safety schools. So in general, you should be setting expectations early and often about how test admissions is often unpredictable and highly competitive in the current landscape because more and more people are buying into exactly this kind of business model that we offer here with the private tutoring in all aspects, not just for their SAT, ACT prep. So you want to highlight the competition. You want to highlight that that is a good motivator to work hard, but you want to, like I said, set expectations early and often, and then provide a good game plan that is based on actual things the student can observe. So one of the first things I would like to do is I'd like to go to each of those schools' websites with the student, and usually during our free introductory hour that we offer, so that this isn't during the time that they're paying for, but talk about, well, this is what this school looks like, this is what the school values, this is what their incoming class looked like, and this is what you would need to do on your end to have the option to be heard and have your application seen and viewed in the in the upcoming cycle. So like we had the graph or the chart earlier that talked about the different test scores and GPA results for each school. That is often like published data. I would go over that data with them so that they know that a large part of this is in their hands, but also that once it's in their hands, it's only for eyes to be on their application, right? So um, I think giving a student a sense of ownership over it and also setting expectations is a really important recipe there. And I did see a question, how many practice tests do you recommend a student take to prepare? So in general, I would prefer to see a student who takes at least 4 full-length timed practice tests. That is not often something I can get students to do. They come to us at different times. Um, and the more practice tests you take, the better, because the SAT and the ACT are very much beasts of repetition. So the more they actually see the way that the material is just tested the same way, same material tested same way, just different numbers, different letters, different grammar, right? The more comfortable they're going to be. But the reason that I like the check-ins is because, one, it gives them enough familiarity with what a timed situation looks like that by the time they show up to actual exam day, after taking 3 or 4 full-length timed practice exams, they are going to know exactly what their rhythm should look like, right? And that's at the time where they're going to start getting bored of it, but at the same time, they're not going to be totally burnt out from a 4-hour exam length session. So it gives them enough control over their environment and their timing. Me on the tutor on the back end, that gives me several check-in points. I like the most important test to me is actually the incoming test, because that shows me a lot of their weaknesses and I can spot treat. And if I'm not seeing the growth that I want to see by exam 1, I now have 2 data points to compare and see if I was addressing the right issues. I can test my theories on where I thought their weak points were. And if they're getting the same things consistently wrong, then I know I need to be reframing how I'm teaching that. I need to be looking for different approaches for that particular student, or if we're seeing variation, there might be something else that is happening, such as their ability to just have the endurance on that full length test. So by the time and they get to practice test 3 in that case, then that is also just a look how good you did, you're gonna do so great. And this is just what test day is going to be like. So, how early is too early to begin prep? So that's a hard question, right? Because the inclination is it's never too early, right? But it is absolutely possible to burn out if you're doing like actual dedicated, driven SAT, ACT prep. So I believe you want at least 3 months of prep time, probably no more than 5 to 6 months of like dedicated driven prep. And again, I would go at a slower rate for that 5 to 6 months than I would for those 3 months. But you have a lot of students, at least in like some of our more like academically driven areas in our client population, who come in freshman year or 8th grade and they want to start SAT prep then. And what I do as a tutor, and what I also set the expectations with parents, is that what we're going to be working on is the underlying substance. You do not have to worry about how much time they're taking on a section that early, unless they care about the other forms of standardized testing that happens between 8th and 11th grade, which they might be because Merit Scholar programs do evaluate those as well. So, um, with the exception of that kind of substance, how long it takes a 9th grader to get through the SAT math section is not as important as understanding that that 9th grader has a very solid foundation in not only the math, that is that stuff that we actually see a lot of juniors missing, which is the basic foundational stuff of data analysis, percentages, fractions, and those sorts of things. So you want to build the good foundation on that, but then also see that they're able to analyze how the SAT constructs its questions in a way that is meant to challenge them in a way that classroom math problems often do not. Right? We see all the time on the SAT where you might have gotten X a long time ago in the problem, but you have like 5 other steps before you get what the actual answer is, because they want you to use X to find Y, and then they want what is 3 divided by Y. A student is inclined to stop at X, especially when they've already had to do so much on the SAT to get to X already. So it's a good time to start framing how they view the problems and building the foundational information, but driven test prep, where it's really like, this is timed SAT. We're going to perfect your performance on the SAT. I think 3 to 6 months is ideal. Yes, I do. So that has been actually one of the things I've been saying to every single student, right? The more you read, the better you're going to do on the standardized test. Even if I have a student who just comes in and they are struggling with math, I want them to read more. The reason for this, in addition to many studies that have talked about how students who read more and read earlier have better success on standardized test, is also that just reading more increases your vocabulary, which is a very important part for not getting lost in SAT passages. It increases your reading speed, which is important for timing, and it is inherently an exercise in information processing, which is applicable to nearly every portion of these standardized tests. So reading is never, ever going to hurt. Even if it's not reading that is necessarily the kind of reading that will be on the exam, students need to be reading more and they need to be reading often to develop those underlying skills that are implicitly tested and give you that extra boost that we don't really have the time or means to build up in these one-on-one 1 hour to 2 hour sessions with them.
Looks like I don't see any more questions in the chat. If there are any more questions, please submit them now. While we're waiting to see if there are any more questions, we want to thank Hannah for supporting us and sharing all of her experience with SAT and ACT prep. We will be providing the um, the recording to anyone who participated so that you can have that as a benchmark, which may lead to additional questions that you may have. And Hannah and our team, as well as the rest of our college tutors brand, because we are national, can support.
I did see another question come through. Yeah, we are national
Okay.
now. I have been getting more national students from you. What can I as a parent do to support my student with test prep beyond getting them tutoring? All right. So in general, like I said, you want to develop good reading skills, good reading comprehension skills, and information processing skills. The best thing that you can do if you're early enough that you're not really in those 3 to 6 months before test day is you will want to make sure that they have a good understanding of the material that appears and that they can take it beyond necessarily like the superficial level, because at least on the SAT in particular, the SAT is a test that is more geared to set out to trick its students than it is to exhaust its students the way the ACT is. And so being able to test a student's ability to take the information out of the context they usually see it and apply it in other formats is going to be the skill that I think is a soft skill that is going to make any form of studying, any form of practice that much more effective for them. So that might look like extra work beyond what their class is giving them if you don't feel that the curriculum they're in is currently already taking on that step. I don't want to make assumptions about anyone's school district or anything like that, because like we just talked about it at length, there's a huge variation in what different school curricula look like. It's becoming even more unregulated currently. So what you would want to do is look at the core skills, so their algebra skills for math, look at their reading comprehension skills, especially with older language English. So being able to read original source materials from late 1700s, early 1800s, for the reading section, and being able to test their like grammar and composition skills, and take those skills that are tested on the SAT as they are appear in their coursework, and just have them do actual work that kind of just challenge that requires more analysis and applying it in different formats than what the classroom does. Would be my best recommendation. So it is a little bit of extra homework at the home front. So whether or not that's looking at free resources online like Khan Academy to drill it in, or looking at what other resources are available in either through the tutoring system, if you or through what your school has to offer. There's also a lot of community resources as well. If you don't really have the ability to go to any tutoring center and talk about that information. So that would be my recommendation on that one. I apologize. I believe I was supposed to press answer live when I said that. I don't see anything else coming through. So I'll turn it over to you, Sharon.
Okay. Well, we want to thank everyone for participating today. As I mentioned earlier, we will provide you with the recording for anyone who attended. And if you have any questions for Hannah, Sue, or anyone else who participated today, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to answer questions. And if you need support with your ACT or SAT prep, we are here to help you. So thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone, for joining. Bye.